In this video, I'm going to discuss the early symptoms that someone may experience due to retinitis pigmentosa. Come on with me, let's go discuss it. Hey, it's great to see you. Welcome back to the channel, Blind to Billionaire. In this video, I'm going to discuss some of the early symptoms of retinitis pigmentosa that someone may experience. So if you're new to the channel, first of all, consider subscribing and welcome. I really appreciate you watching this video. So I'm actually going to be using myself as an example and some of the symptoms that I experienced when I was younger prior to the diagnosis of retinitis pigmentosa. So to do that, I'm actually going to rewind and just give you a little synopsis of my life prior to the diagnosis and then right around the diagnosis and a little bit after that. So I am currently 34 years old. I was diagnosed with RP when I was 15. And I would say that we started seeing symptoms. When I say we, I mean my parents and I and my brother. We started noticing symptoms with my vision that something wasn't right when I was probably in my early teens, maybe like 12, 11, around there, possibly 13-ish. So around that time frame, around that age, we started noticing that there was just something not right with my vision. And for example, the way that we learn this is one of the best examples that I can think of is if I was at home or if I was at school, if I dropped something on the floor, regardless of what it was, it could have been a pencil, a pen, a coin of some kind, a piece of paper. It didn't matter what it was. It could be big or small. It didn't matter. If I dropped something on the floor, if I looked down on the floor to find that item, I would sometimes get lucky and see it right away, or other times I would sit there and I would literally stare at the floor for a few minutes and I wouldn't be able to see the item. It was so weird to me. And then at home, I was able to observe my parents and my brother. They would be in the same situation. They would drop something on the floor. They would literally look down at the floor, and it's like all in one movement, they would look down at the floor and then bend over and grab what it was that they dropped. So we started noticing that, like, okay, something isn't right. Everybody else can look at the floor and see whatever it was that they dropped immediately and pick it up, whereas I look at the floor and I can sit there literally for a couple minutes sometimes looking around for it, and sometimes I would find it, sometimes I wouldn't be able to find it at all. And so that was one example. Another example would be if I was outside playing catch with my dad or my brother or friends, and we were throwing a ball back and forth or maybe a frisbee or something like that. I would say that I would only see the ball or whatever it was we were throwing maybe 80% of the time. The other 20% of the time, there was just nothing there. Like I would see the person, swing their arm like the ball was coming. I would see them throw it, but then there was nothing there. Like I couldn't see the ball in the sky. So then I would take cover usually. Typically, I'd probably turn around and like cover my head or something because whatever it was we were throwing, typically it'd probably hurt to get hit by it. So that was another example. One other thing that I can think of is, again, if we were outside playing some kind of sport or doing anything outside, if I heard an airplane flying over and I looked up at the sky, like where I heard the noise or just anywhere up in the sky, I wouldn't be able to see the airplane, or just birds or anything up in the sky, I wouldn't be able to see it. And not all the time. I would be able to see it sometimes, but if I did, I wouldn't be able to just glance up at the sky and be like, oh, there's an airplane. It would be like I'd look up at the sky and I'd have to look around and be like, oh, okay, there it is. I finally see it. And other people that I would be with, whether it was my family or friends, they would literally look up at the sky and they would see whatever it was immediately. So again, it was like, okay, something isn't right here. Clearly something isn't right. So there was a period of time during that age range. I'm not sure when it was, but it was maybe between the ages of 12 and 14, around that time. We saw a few different ophthalmologists, and everybody that we saw didn't exactly have an answer for me. They basically just gave the cookie cutter answers like, oh, you need glasses, you need contacts, you need to pay attention. Hey, have you ever thought of that? You need to pay attention. It's like, well, I think I'm paying attention. It's just I can't see it. So that was a couple of things there. And then what else did they say? So yeah, so it was it was just the cookie cutter responses, nothing really definitive. And then there was maybe one person who suggested that I need vision therapy. So I don't know how long I did this for, but I would say maybe 6 to 9 months, I would guess. I went through vision therapy. So I think it was, again, I don't really recall, but it was maybe a couple times per week. I would go to an office and I would do a variety of activities that were all vision related for about an hour or so. And then supposedly that was supposed to fix my vision because my eyes apparently weren't working synergistically, and that was causing my lack of vision or being able to see things. So again, I went through this vision therapy for 6 or 9 months or however long it was. It wasn't all that long, but it was long enough to, to realize that it wasn't helping. So then eventually I finally went to another ophthalmologist, and he dilated my eyes just like all the other ones have done. And he looked around in there, and I remember this very specifically. I was actually 14 at the time, and he looked in there, and my mom was in the room. I think it was just the two of us. And I remember him saying very specifically, I see something in your eye. I see something in the back of your eye. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it means, but I want you to see somebody else. And he referred me to a retina specialist. And a few months later, it was actually on my 15th birthday, I went in and saw this retina specialist. And then I underwent all of these visual field testing and just a lot of different testing for quite a few hours. And then eventually, after all this testing, he came into the room with results, this retina specialist, and ultimately gave the diagnosis of retinitis pigmentosa. So there was a lot leading up to it. I would say in all, from the time that we started kind of pursuing what possibly could be causing my vision to be less, not quite as good as everybody else's around me, it probably took about a year or maybe a little bit more, maybe 2 years to kind of figure it out and narrow this down and actually see somebody that referred me to the right person. Some of the other symptoms that we noticed early on, but we never really realized what they meant until after the diagnosis and after we learned more about RP. So I don't ever recall being able to see anything in the dark. I've never had vision in the dark. And that was always so weird to me because if I was ever outside, so let me rewind just a second. When I was young, maybe like 6 years old, my dad and brother and I, the three of us, would go camping. We went up and we had an annual camping thing with a few other people. And it was in the fall, so it got dark out early, and there was just a lot of nighttime activity when we'd be doing this, sitting around the fire or doing whatever we were doing. And I remember other people would be walking around in the dark and navigating just like it was no big deal, just like it was daylight. And if I ever walked away from the fire far enough that, when you're sitting around fire at night, you know how the flame illuminates kind of the perimeter of the fire and kind of the whole area around. If I walked outside of that area, I couldn't see anything. It was just pure black. Meanwhile, the other people that I was with would be walking around and just navigating like it was no big deal. And I thought, this is weird. They can see at night, and I literally can't see anything. It's black to me. And so that was just one example, but there are many other experiences where maybe I was outside playing with friends at night and the kids would be running around and doing whatever they were doing at night, and then I would be the kid afraid to run around because it's like I can't see anything. Am I going to run into a tree or something? So I would say night blindness was probably the earliest symptom that I was experiencing, but nobody knew anything about it because I thought it was just normal to not be able to see anything in the dark because obviously it's black outside. Why should we be able to see in the dark? But over time, as I observed other people and as other people observed me, we noticed that it became very obvious that I couldn't see in the dark. So that was a little bit of a red flag, but it wasn't enough to really act on because it didn't stand out enough to act on it or to kind of investigate it more, I guess. Maybe we should have, but I guess I don't think we really investigated it all that much. But so that was probably the earliest symptom. And I actually thought of this a few years ago, and it's actually kind of funny because it all makes perfect sense. So when I was younger, the rule was around my house, if we ever left the house, like if someone was, like let's say my parents were gone and I was however old, let's say my parents were at work or whatever, and if I ever left the house, even to go next door, the rule was always leave a note. This was way before cell phones, so the rule was always just leave a note. Where did you go? Where are you? When will you be home? Whatever. And when I would leave a note, I would literally take a pen and I would write my note. But when I wrote it, I didn't just write the letter and the words one time. I would take the pen and go over and over and over the letters to make them bold. And I didn't know why I was doing it at the time, but I would do that. And now thinking back on it, I did that because that was the only way that I was actually able to see what I was writing. And then I thought, well, if this is the only way that I can see it, it must be the same way that everybody else can see it. And I remember my dad specifically would always kind of say like, hey, you don't need to do that. You can just write it just one time. That's totally fine. We can see it. And it never really dawned on me why I was doing it. And apparently it didn't stand out to anybody else other than the fact that probably I was just like a quirky kid who decided to trace over the letters and the words multiple times to make it this bold thing, so that I could actually see it. But now thinking back on it, 20 years ago, it all makes sense why I did that. But again, I didn't know why I was doing it. So that all of this, I would say, happened back when I was between the ages of probably 11 and 14, 11 and 15, around that age range. Is pre-diagnosis, and there were just a lot of different things that I was doing and experiencing that didn't make sense, but ultimately were going to result in the diagnosis of retinitis pigmentosa. So, like I said, I was diagnosed with RP on my 15th birthday, and at the time when we got the diagnosis, I didn't know what it meant. The guy that the doctor that gave the diagnosis, he was, from what I recall, he was a little bit vague and somewhat blunt, but basically he just said, this is it, it's retinitis pigmentosa, and ultimately it's going to result in blindness at some point. So at the age of 15, as you can probably imagine, I was confused. I didn't know what to think. I think my parents were completely caught off guard, because it's like, they weren't expecting that. I mean, what a scary thing to think that your 15-year-old son is possibly going to be blind someday. So it was a huge diagnosis, and it was scary. And like I said, I didn't know what to do. And I lived probably the next, 10 years of my life, probably mostly in denial. And because I always thought, oh, that's not going to happen to me. I'm totally fine. I can see just fine now. And although my life was pretty normal, I lived a pretty normal life and mostly independent for quite a few years, probably until I was, roughly 25 is when it was, I was pretty good and independent until I was about 25. When I was 26, 27, that's when things started to get a little worse. And then from 27 on until now, I lost a lot of the independence that I had back then. But between the ages of 15 and let's just say 27-ish, like I said, my life was pretty good. I did drive for a short time in there. I got my license when I was 18. I stopped driving, I think it was just before my 22nd birthday. So roughly 3 years I drove in there, maybe a little bit less. And realistically, I probably shouldn't have been even driving that long. But I kind of lived in this state of denial because I never thought that it would happen to me, because my vision was mostly fine, with the exception of not being able to do a few things like play sports. I wasn't able to just go out and throw a ball around with friends or my parents or brother, things like that, because I couldn't see the ball. Once I stopped driving around the age of 22, 21, around that range, when I stopped driving there, that was a huge hit to kind of like my ego and my independence, because here I am, an early 20s kid, and I want to be free. Finally, I'm out of high school, and it's time to have some fun. And there it is. I lose my independence. So I always have to rely on a ride from my parents or whoever it was. And conveniently at that same time, a lot of my friends disappeared, because that's typically what friends do, who actually aren't friends. They stick around when it's convenient, but as soon as you start asking them for a ride all over the place, then they disappear quickly. I realize that. So, but anyway, I'm getting off track just a little bit from the earliest symptoms that someone may experience from RP. But so just to hit some of those points again, I would say night blindness is probably the most common symptom that most people experience from RP before they actually have a diagnosis. From most of the people that I've met with RP and that I've gotten to know, they typically say that they've almost never had the ability to see in the dark. So that seems something like it's ubiquitous among all or many or most that I've run into anyway, RP patients. So something else that you may experience would be, like I was saying, just the ability or the inability to see certain things occasionally. Like if you drop something on the floor, like, okay, well, it's not there. Well, obviously it's there, but I'm just not finding it. So that would be another early symptom that I think a lot of people experience, and maybe you don't really recognize what it is that's causing that, but that is definitely an early symptom that is caused by RP. Also, another early symptom of RP is the loss of peripheral vision. And now that actually happens very slowly, and it can happen in many different ways. For example, you may not even notice that your peripheral vision is deteriorating. But one symptom or one way to notice that is if you're suddenly starting to, not suddenly, but over time, if you notice that you're starting to trip on things. One really great example of tripping on things or kicking things would be those wet floor signs that you find at stores. They're about, 2.5, maybe 3 feet tall. They're yellow, and I'm sure every one of you have tripped on them if you're blind or visually impaired, if you have RP. Those things are a nuisance. I've kicked so many of those things in my life. But anyway, those would be like a perfect example, or anything. If you notice that you're walking around and you're maybe tripping on curbs, or you're kicking different things around, or you're noticing that you're bumping into things, like the depth perception maybe isn't quite like it used to be, that could be an early symptom of RP. So what's interesting about RP too is that the peripheral vision is typically lost first, and the field of vision is lost from the outside going in. So like your periphery goes, and then eventually it starts closing in, and the field of vision begins to narrow more and more over time, and then eventually it takes over the central vision as well. It's a very slow process. Even in people like me who have a form of RP that is actually more rapidly progressing, it still took many years for that process to take place. So what's interesting about me is when I went through the field of vision test, what was interesting is the doctor found that I actually had blotches in my peripheral vision. So for example, how to explain this? So I'm going to point here. So let's just say, like down here, I don't know if you can see my hand or not, but down here I have like zero peripheral vision. Like my vision doesn't start, well, I can't even see my hand at all. But when I had this whole testing going on and everything like that, my vision was a lot better. I didn't have peripheral vision up until literally like right here. So anything below like this level, I couldn't see at all. So when I would walk around, I typically found that I looked down at the ground. And a lot of other people apparently noticed that too, because people would constantly ask me like, hey, why do you walk around staring at the ground? And I honestly didn't know why I did it until I did the field of vision, and then I saw the printout and it was like, oh, well, that makes sense, because I literally don't have any vision from like here down. So that's why I'm staring at the ground, because I'm always looking down to see if I'm going to trip on something, a curb, one of those wet floor signs, maybe a little kid, or anything else, some other hazard that could be in my way. So I walked around looking at the ground a lot. Not that I wanted to, but it's just a natural reaction for me. That was just the way that I had to do it to avoid hazards. But anyway, getting back on track, what was interesting about the field of vision test is I had blotches all over. So for example, I may be able to see my hand way over here way out to the side, but yet maybe I have a big empty blotch right here. So there would be like a spot right here that I couldn't see anything, but all around it I could see, even way out here. Or I may have a blotch like right here that doesn't show any image, but then way up here above, I can see something. I can see a light. So it's interesting that the field of vision doesn't exactly narrow all symmetrical. I guess if that's the right way to explain it. So like the field of vision doesn't symmetrically close in altogether, but rather it can come in from maybe the bottom up and then just kind of come in from the sides, or maybe from the top down, or maybe you just have a wide field of vision, but there's blotches all over your visual field, causing the loss of some peripheral vision and causing ultimately the resulting in just bumping into things, or just not being able to see certain things. So one other interesting point about this, back to the example that I was talking about a little earlier, when I would be playing catch with my dad or my brother, and they would throw the ball to me and I would only see it 80% of the time. Well, those 20% of the time that I wouldn't see the ball, it happened to be in one of those blotches that was in my field of vision that didn't allow me to see it. So that's kind of interesting, because I would see the person throw the ball, but then all of a sudden I'd look in the sky for it and it's like, well, wait, it's not there. I don't see it. Well, it just happened to be flying through one of those blotches, not allowing me to be able to see it. And that's what would happen. So yeah, that would explain why I wasn't able to see the balls earlier in my life. So I feel like this is really interesting when, after the diagnosis of RP comes in, and maybe you go through the field of vision testing and you can see your actual field of vision and the peripheral vision that has maybe been lost. It's really interesting because it answers a lot of questions that have maybe been kind of in the back of your mind through some of your life, or maybe it explains some of the different things that a person has possibly been doing. For example, like when I used to go over and over, when I would write notes and I would go over and over and make it bold. I never knew why I did that at the time, but after the diagnosis and realized that, oh yeah, I can actually see bold text a lot easier than I can see just regular text, it made sense why I did it. So those are, I would say, a lot of the earliest symptoms that a person can see that typically experiences from RP. So anyway, I really appreciate you watching this video, and I can definitely elaborate more on some of these topics and go into more detail and maybe give you a little bit more of an idea of the progression of RP from maybe like ages 25 to present. So like I said, I'm 34, so from maybe like the last 9 years until present, but I should probably do that in a different video, maybe like a more advanced stages of RP, the progression. So I think that might be kind of an interesting topic too, to, like I just did, explain my life from basically childhood up to roughly 25-ish time frame. And then maybe I could do another video between like 25 and present, just in the more advanced stages of RP that I've experienced. So anyway, if you're new to the channel, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe. But otherwise, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them down below. I really enjoy connecting with all of you and getting to know all of you. It's just been a really fun aspect of having this channel, to see all the comments coming in and getting to know all of you. It's just been so much fun, and it really gives me something to look forward to. Excuse me. But it's just been so much fun to learn everybody's story and just continue on with this channel and hopefully continue to provide more valuable content to all of you. So anyway, if you are new, like I said, again, please do me a huge favor, hit the subscribe button. Otherwise, leave any comments or questions that you have down below. And yeah, I hope to see you on another video sometime in the future, probably tomorrow. So thanks again for watching. I will see you again soon. Thank you.